Hi, dear friends, some words of Torah for Parshat Vayechi. We might expect that the last verses of the book of Bereshit should, in some way, encapsulate the entire book of Genesis. The verses don't seem to contain that level of gravitas. Instead, they seem to merely discuss Yosef's death and that before he died, he imposed an oath upon the Jewish people that when it would be time to leave Egypt, they would transport his remains with them. But perhaps there's more to these verses than meets the eye. Let's look at two psukim at the end of the Parsha. The first is Yosef telling his brothers what will occur in the future. He said, Anochi meit, I'm about to die. Velokim pakod yifkod etchem. Elokim will come back to you. Vehe'ela etchem min haaretz hazot, and will bring you up from this land. El haaretz, to the land asher nishba la'Avraham liYitzchak u'liYaakov, that he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The very next verse states that Yosef imposed an oath upon Bnei Israel, which seems just another way of saying Yosef's brothers, since they are all the children of Israel, which is another name for Jacob. What is that oath? So Yosef said, Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem. Elokim will come back to you. Vehalitem et atzmotai mizeh, and at that time you must bring up my remains from this place. There's a very curious anomaly in that in both verses, Yosef notes that God would pakod yifkod etchem. He will come back to you and redeem the Jews from Egypt. But there's a subtle difference that is noticed by some commentaries. In the first verse it reads, Velokim pakod yifkod, where God's name is mentioned before his action of coming back to the Jews. By contrast, in the second verse it reads, Pakod yifkod Elokim, placing the verb of coming back before naming Elokim, who will do the coming back. I think that this subtle switch is providing us with a wealth of information. One way of summarizing the whole book of Genesis is that God created all of reality for the sake of his crowning creation, man. He designated a function for man, which, in addition to being fruitful and multiplying, is to emulate God's goodness and benevolence. Just as God is a creator and provider to all, he wishes for man to do the same and be his partner in all the good that transpires in this existence. The reason for all of the stories in Bereshit of our ancestors is to demonstrate that Hashem chose the Jewish people precisely because we accepted the mantle of imitatio Dei, to emulate our creator and be his partner, as demonstrated by the lives of those virtuous first Jews, Avraham, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Rachel, and Leah. Yosef was communicating to his brothers that with his death, there was going to be a period of transition. Whereas before, Yosef was God's partner in realizing the divine plan, from now on, all of Yaakov's children and future descendants would have to take up the mantle of partnering with God to realize that divine plan. When Yosef first spoke to his brothers, he placed himself adjacent to God's name. Anochi meit, I'm dying, velokim, and God will come back to you, pakod yifkod. Meaning, what is pakod yifkod? That God will realize the divine plan. This was a way of consoling his brothers, that even though he would soon die, Yosef's partner in caretaking the Jewish people would never die, so they had nothing to fear. God will always be with you even after I die. But then Yosef wanted to vest within his brothers their role as God's partner in their future, and so he placed them adjacent to God's name. Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem. There will come a time when you, the entire family of Israel's children, will be Hashem's partner in realizing the divine plan. When leaving Egypt, you too will play a role and partner with God during the Exodus. You will take my remains with you, thus performing a kind of imitatio Dei. Just as God brings you out of Egypt, you will also bring something holy out of Egypt, my remains. This will demonstrate how you are God's partner in this effort. So whereas before God's name is adjacent to Yosef, now God's name is adjacent to the rest of the Jewish people. This is how the book of Bereshit comes to fruition. In the past, over the course of this book, individual members of a specific family demonstrated their ability to emulate God and partner with him in doing God's work. What Yosef foreshadowed for Bnei Yisrael is that when it's time to leave Egypt, no longer will individual Jews be partnering with God, but rather the entire nation of Israel, the Bnei Yisrael, will have the duty of being Hashem's partners and advancing the divine plan for all of existence. And indeed, that is the transition point and the difference between the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus. The phrase pakod yifkod, which describes how God will come back to us and redeem us, is phrased as a double verb, pakod yifkod. The Al-Shich HaKadosh explained that the verb is doubled because there will be two parties who are redeemed from exile and diaspora, Israel and the Shekhinah, God's divine presence, which is with the Jewish people wherever we are. This in itself is a beautiful sentiment and provides reassurance to the Jews who suffer in Galut that no matter where we find ourselves, no matter how lowly we may have sunk, Hashem has never forsaken us, not even for a moment. We suggest that there's another reason for the doubling of the verb pakod yifkod. In every iteration of redemption, there are two partners busy at work, God and the Jewish people. We are partners in the effort to realize God's ultimate plan for a utopian planet of peace, prosperity, and universal goodwill. In the past, individuals like Yosef acted as Hashem's partners. But in the more recent past, as well as in the present and future, the entire Jewish nation plays the role of God's partner. Since October 7th, every segment of the Jewish world has been partnering with God to realize the divine plan. Our soldiers in Israel have been fighting the physical war. Our civilians in Israel have been feeding and otherwise tending to the needs of a wounded nation. Our scientists and technologists have been using their brilliant minds to advance civilization, and our rabbis and their students have been upholding the world through their Torah study. The Jews of the diaspora have also been partners by supporting Israel from afar and combating the war of ideas against the evil ideologies that we are witnessing in the streets of all major Western cities. That is our calling, and if you find yourself on the sidelines, then you are abdicating your role as a member of the children of Israel who are tasked with partnering with God. If you aren't already, get involved and make the world a better place for ourselves, our children, and most importantly for our beloved partner in heaven. What you will discover is that in the process of getting involved, you will become the greatest beneficiary of that effort, whether it be feeding the homeless, visiting the sick, supporting the war in Israel, or making your voice heard to the politicians and to the public. Being part of the Jewish people is the greatest gift to any Jew. And so, dear friends, may we see the ultimate fruition of all these efforts. May we see it b'mheira b'yameinu, amen, speedily in our days. Here's wishing you a beautiful Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.